Good afternoon, Mark Stott of HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane and Hurricane HD video blog for Labor Day 2012. A look at Leslie. The shear has returned. Center of the tropical storm now exposed again on the northwest side of all of that deep convection. If we take a close-up look through the floater image, this is a visible satellite image, so you're not looking at the colors of cloud tops, but I think you can tell that these brighter whites here would reach up higher in the atmosphere than this low-level swirl, which is the center of circulation. This is kind of like looking at the bones of the storm, and all the meat has been pushed off to one side. Not a pretty sight, for sure, and literally and figuratively, for Leslie, the tropical storm, it's definitely not an indication of it being very healthy. The convection not wrapping all around that center. I think that's going to change, though. The forecast models showing a large-scale pattern change where the upper-level winds are going to favor quite a bit of strengthening over the next few days once it gets through this shear zone. Bermuda is right there, and Leslie approaching Bermuda in the 5-day forecast, although it may try to come up around it enough that it could miss, at least if you buy the UK Met forecast. This is last night's forecast from the UK Met model, showing it getting back to around 69.2 west, which is pretty far to the west compared to where the Hurricane Center has it. If we go back to this track map here, this is 75 degrees longitude, so 70, we kind of split this right down the middle here. So the UK Met showing it coming back to near 70, and then maybe turning on out to sea, possibly sparing Bermuda a direct hit. We'll defer to the Hurricane Center and their forecast advisories over the next couple of days to figure out what's going to happen with this. But you folks in Bermuda need to be paying attention to this. You might have to deal with a hurricane in a couple of days, at least the conditions spreading in, and certainly knocking on your door by day 5, according to this official forecast from this morning. Also, the swells that will come out from this large system will eventually impact much of the east coast, bringing high surf even down here to the windwards and leewards, more the leewards than anything, U.S. British Virgin Islands, the north coast of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, Cuba, the Bahamas. Everybody's going to get in on this swell action. Great for the surfers, not so good for moms and dads who are worried about the little ones playing in that rough surf. So be mindful of that over the next few days. Sea surface temperatures warm all across the Atlantic Basin as you would expect for September. The departures from normal, though, unbelievable, just substantially warmer than normal water here in the northwest Atlantic. If we do get a long track hurricane heading up the east coast, it is going to have more than enough warm water to work with. That water 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, in some cases 4 and 5 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than normal. And in the Gulf and parts of the Caribbean, it has been cooled off due to the effects of Isaac moving through, bleeding off some of that energy. That's what they do. They take that heat out of the tropics. One thing I want to talk about today is the El Nino and how it's progressing or not. This is the Southern Oscillation Index, an indication of the pressure pattern across the tropical Pacific. And what we're looking for mainly is to see if the 30 and 90-day averages are -8 or lower. And you can see it's -3.7 for 30 days and only -5.9 for 90 days. So that means that the atmosphere really isn't behaving like it's an El Nino. The pressure pattern is such that the trade winds are maybe right at normal to slightly above normal in some cases. In other words, we're not seeing the ocean-atmosphere coupling of a significant El Nino event. And if we look at what things were like a month ago, these are the sea surface temperature anomalies in the tropical Pacific. And notice when I go to today's graphic, all the heat that gets erased from in here, it's not huge, but it's noticeable. See, there we are today. Much more blue showing up, much more yellow. If I go back, that's August the 2nd, September the 3rd. August the 2nd, September the 3rd. You can clearly see that the heat in the Pacific has dissipated just a little bit over enough of an area that the El Nino really isn't that prevalent. So we're not going to see those strong upper level winds streaking across the tropical Atlantic. That's probably not going to be the issue. It's this dry air that we have seen in the mid-levels of the atmosphere all across the tropics that have really kept a lid on things literally. It is not until these systems get into the subtropics that they really start to develop. And unfortunately, if they move towards land, then that's where we are, and we can be really impacted. If Isaac had had another day over water and the conditions were as favorable as they were, it would have been a completely different story down along the Mississippi and Louisiana coastline, Alabama too. So we're really starting to get into the meat of the season here, and with there not being a strong El Nino in place, it's probably going to equal a fairly busy September. And the MJO forecast shows that. This is the filtered outgoing long-wave radiation forecast, and the way I look at it, these purples in here, this is North America right here, South America, okay? So that's your outline, and that holds true for every one of these maps. I'm looking to see where this purple, dark blue and purple is, and as you notice, as we get past the 10th of the month, into the mid part of September, more and more purple and blue showing up in our part of the world, indicating the wet phase of the MJO, or more enhanced convection across the Atlantic basin. And that means that it could be a very busy mid to latter part of September. In fact, looking at a different version of the GFS MJO forecast, this is where we were. Isaac formed during this time period, and the MJO forecast showing pretty negligible signal right now. It's in this area where the MJO is hardly detectable, but the GFS forecasting the MJO to swing back out into the same area where it was that formed Isaac, meaning that as we get through the middle part of the month, evidence is starting to suggest that we will have a very busy time in the tropics. So we'll be watching Leslie closely, especially folks in Bermuda, possibly the Canadian Maritimes, and as I mentioned, surfers, get your boards ready, but also be very careful as those swells come in over the weekend. If the beach is closed to swimming because of dangerous surf, adhere to that. We don't want any fatalities due to indirect effects from Leslie. Alright, again, I'm Mark Suttle of HurricaneTrack.com, my website. Always glad to participate and provide these videos to Hurricane HD, and I'll be back again to do it tomorrow.